The Fortune Teller's Game, a Mick Mack mystery. Act 1, The Prediction. Chapter 1, Tea Leaves and Trouble. College Street, on a late autumn afternoon, smelled of roasted chestnuts, diesel fumes, and too many opinions. The streetcars clanged like tin kettles, and cafe doors opened onto a cloud of espresso steam and cigarette smoke. Mick McCathie tugged his brown overcoat tighter and tilted his fedora against the wind. "Why is it always colder in this side of town?" MacNeely grumbled, stomping his boots. "Feels like the wind's got a grudge." "Wind doesn't care about you, Mac," Mick said, dryly, "but the cannoli might." He nodded toward Millie Fortunato's tea shop, its hand-painted sign half hidden by laundry lines strung above the street. Inside the place smelled of sugar, tobacco, and something stronger, tucked behind the counter. A velvet curtain divided the tea shop into two worlds. The front, with lace-draped tables and steaming cups, and the back, where rumors said fortunes were told, and numbers were run with equal conviction. At the center sat Millie Fortunato herself, wrapped in a silk shawl that shimmered like spilled wine. Her fingers glittered with rings, and her stare could cut through brass. When she spotted Mick and Mack, she spread her arms wide as if they were wayward nephews. "My detectives, you come for tea, or for trouble." Her voice filled the shop, musical and scolding at once. "Can only," Mack said without hesitation. "The trouble will probably come free of charge." Laughter rippled through the tables. Millie clucked her tongue and waved for plates. Then, with a dramatic sweep, she gathered the cups from 3 of her regulars, dock workers with big hands and skeptical eyes, and peered into the leaves. "You," she said, pointing a jeweled finger at the eldest. "You will find money soon. Keep your hands clean, eh?" The man chuckled. "And you," she told the second, "a woman waits for you. She has sharp teeth. Careful where you kiss." That got a roar. Finally, she looked at the third. Her gaze narrowed. The laughter died away. "You," she said softly, the room leaning in. "Tonight, before midnight, death waits for you in the street." A hush fell over the tea shop. Even the clink of spoons stopped. Then someone barked a nervous laugh. The spell broke. The dock worker waved her off. "Bah, Millie, you tried to scare me, eh? I've walked these streets all my life." Millie only crossed herself and pushed a cup away. Mac leaned into Mick. "I'll say this. She's got stage presence. Think she believes it?" Mick's brow furrowed. "Doesn't matter what she believes. The question is, do her customers?" They didn't get their answer until dusk. A patrolman came pounding into the shop, cap askew and face pale. "Sal Russo's dead," he blurted. "Hit by a truck on Gray Street just before midnight." The laughter was gone. Every eye turned toward Millie. She sat perfectly still, her dark eyes gleaming like she'd seen it all coming. Chapter 2, A Mother's Reign. By the next afternoon, the tea shop was packed wall to wall. Word of Millie's prophecy spread faster than gossip at City Hall. Housewives in shawls, card players in flat caps, even a priest with his collar crooked all drifted in, ordering tea they had no intention of drinking, just to get a look at the woman who predicted Sal Russo's death. Millie soaked it up like a queen in her court. She clapped shoulders, pinched cheeks, swatted anyone who reached for pastries before paying. She was loud, warm, and terrifying, sometimes in the same breath. "Eat, eat," she scolded a skinny teenager hovering near the door. "You look like a broom handle with ears. Here, 2 biscotti. On the house. But if I see you smoking in the alley again, I break your legs, capiche?" The boy fled with a nervous grin. Mick leaned against the counter, observing. "She's got the meeting out of her hand. Better a biscotti than her brass knuckles," Mac muttered, brushing crumbs off his coat. That's when the door swung open hard enough to rattle the bell above it. The broad figure filled the frame. Hat brim low, coat tailored as sharp. Manny the Hat Kaufmann. His voice was honey with ground glass underneath. Millie said, not bothering with hellos. You've been busy. Too busy. The room hushed. Even Millie's daughters behind the counter froze mid-pour. Millie didn't flinch. She spread her arms like she was about to embrace him, though her eyes could have frozen gin. Manny, you come to pay respects? Or just to wag your tongue? You're stepping on my racket. Manny's voice was soft, dangerous. Numbers, bets, whispers in the dark. That's my business. Millie laughed loud enough to shake the teacups. Your business? Your business? Manny, I was running numbers when you were still polishing shoes on Yonge Street. I let you play with your little chalkboards because I was busy raising sons. Don't forget who taught this town how to gamble. The crowd murmured. Manny's jaw tightened, but he didn't move closer. Mick noticed the way his hand twitched toward his hat brim. The old habit when he was holding back anger. Mac nudged Mick, whispering, if this turns into a food fight, I'm grabbing the cannoli first. Mick's eyes stayed on Millie and Manny. If it turns into a shooting match, the cannoli won't save you. Manny finally tipped his fedora, all sarcasm. Enjoy your moment, Millie. But fortune-telling and numbers don't mix forever. Sooner or later, you pick one, or the streets pick for you. He turned on his heel and left, the bell jingling like a gunshot. Room buzzed with relief. Millie only shrugged, poured herself a cup of tea, muttered loud enough for all to hear. Men like him, all hat, no fortune. The place erupted in laughter. Mick wasn't laughing. He exchanged a look with Mac. She knew Russo would die, Mick murmured. And now Manny storms in about numbers? It's too neat to be coincidence. Mac licked sugar from his thumb. You're thinking inside info, not crystal ball? I'm thinking Millie Fortunato doesn't need tea leaves to see the future. She just needs the right connections. Act 2, Behind the Curtain. Chapter 3, Numbers Don't Lie. The next morning, Mick and Mac returned to Millie's tea shop. Not for cannoli this time, though Mac tried to argue for just one for the road. The place looked the same as ever. Lace on the tables, steam in the windows, customers gossiping over chipped cups. Behind the curtain, Millie's world shifted from cozy to clandestine. A nephew with slick hair and a nervous smile blocked the way. Private, he said. Millie's voice boomed from inside. Let them through. They're family now. Until they're not. Behind the curtain, the air smelled less of tea, more of ink, dust, and sweat. A long table was scattered with teapots, each lid numbered in chalk. Mick picked one up, tipped it over. A folded slip of paper slid out. Looks like the fortune here is 15-1 on the third at Woodbine, he said. Mac whistled. She's running half the track from her teapots. On the shelf behind them sat a stack of recipe books, flour-dusted and innocent. Mick pulled one down, flipped it open. The first few pages listed biscotti and cannoli. The next pages, columns of names, numbers, and payouts, written in neat, slanted hand. Ledger disguised as known as cookbook, Mick muttered. Smart. The coppers raid. They walk away hungry. Millie swept in then, shawl swirling. Of course I keep records. You think I trust my boys to remember who owes what? They can barely remember to button their shirts. Her boys were everywhere. A broad-shouldered son sat in the corner, carving in a block of wood with a knife that looked better suited for ribs than pine. A thin nephew leaned too close to Mac, offering a cigarette with the oily smile of someone who could sell sand in the desert. Another lounged by the back door, eyes darting like a lookout who already expected trouble. Nice family, Mac muttered to Mick. If you like your uncle shady, your cousin slippery, and your brothers packing heat. Mick ignored him, studying the room. Each man seemed loyal on the surface, but there was an edge. Too much rivalry in their smirks, too much calculation in their glances. Tell me, Millie, Mac said, how did you know about Sal Russo? Millie raised her eyebrows, her rings flashing as she stirred sugar into her tea. Mother knows things, and the leaves don't lie. Neither do ledgers, Mick replied. The sons shifted uncomfortably. The thin nephew laughed too loudly. The lookout by the door scowled like he wanted to speak, thought better of it. Mac leaned close to Mick. You think what I'm thinking? That one of these fine young men either knows too much or won't live long enough to tell it. Millie slammed her cup down, rattling the china. Enough questions. You want answers? You'll wait for the next cup. But Mick could tell Millie wasn't the only one with secrets. Her own brood was hiding something. And whichever one cracked first might be the next name scribbled in her recipe book of debts. Chapter 4. Death in the Cards. Sal Russo's file sat heavy on Mick's desk, back at the station. Officially accidental death. Witnesses said he'd stepped off the curb near Gray Street, too quick, straight into the path of a delivery truck. Driver sober, brakes bad, weather clear, case closed. But Mick wasn't buying it. Guy's been walking that corner since he was old enough to lace boots, Mick muttered. Tapped the report with his pen. You don't just forget how to cross a street. Mac lounged in the chair opposite, chewing on a toothpick. So what's your angle? Somebody gave him a push? Or knew he'd be there at that exact time, Mick leaned back, rubbing his jaw. Millie Fortunato just happened to predict it. Mac grinned. Maybe she's psychic. My Aunt Tilly swore she could talk to cats. Never made a dime off it, though. Your Aunt Tilly didn't run a numbers game, Mick said flatly. They didn't have long to speculate before the case twisted again. 2 nights later, they were back in Millie's shop, this time keeping a quieter eye on her clientele. She was in fine form, shawl flashing, cards spread on the table for a crowd of eager listeners. You, she pointed at a wiry man with coal dust in his hands. You must watch your steps. A fall waits for you, quick and sudden. A stairwell, maybe. You laugh now, but tonight. She wagged her finger, her gold rings catching the lamplight. The crowd chuckled nervously. Mac leaned in, whispering, Tell me again why we're wasting time on parlor tricks instead of grabbing a hot supper? Because an hour later, the man was found at the bottom of a stairwell on Clinton Street. Broken neck. Another accident. By the time word reached the tea shop, the laughter had died entirely. 2 in a row, Mac muttered as they walked back through the night air, their breath fogging in the cold. If she calls a horse race next, I'm betting the farm. Mick wasn't laughing. 2 men dead, both exactly as she said. Either Millie Fortunato's a prophet, or she's passing the script to someone holding the knife. That's when a familiar shadow slid out from an alleyway. Evelyn Eve Whitmore, fur collar, hat tipped low, eyes sharp as glass. Evening, gentlemen, she purred. Still chasing tea leaves? Something like that, Mick said cautiously. Eve glanced towards Millie's glowing shop front. And here's a leaf or 2 for your pot. A cozy little cafe? It's not just numbers and fortunes. Certain friends of mine say Millie's back room is also a meeting place for foreign visitors. The kind who don't waste their time on pastries. Mac blinked. Foreign? You mean like tourists? Eve smiled faintly, not the kind who buy postcards. She slipped a fold note into Mick's hand and was gone, heels clicking down the street. Mac watched her disappear. Did she ever give you the feeling she knows the whole story and just likes watching us chase crumbs? Mick unfolded the note, eyes narrowing. Every time. And in the lamplight, a single line stared back at him. Your deaths have already been written. Act 3, Family and Fortune. Chapter 5, Manny's Move. The Fortunato tea shop was bursting at the seams the night Manny the Hat decided to make his play. Word had spread like wildfire, 2 deaths foretold. Both come true. Curious crowds filled the front, while in the back room, Millie's sons hovered like storm clouds. Mick Mack slipped inside just as Manny arrived, his broad frame and impeccable suit, parting the crowd with a knife. He was trailed by 2 lieutenants and inevitably Shnooky Levine, trying very hard to look important and failing spectacularly. Millie, Manny said, voice smooth as polished marble. We need to talk. Talk? Millie bellowed, shawl flashing as she rose from her chair. You don't come here to talk. You come here to bark. Go bark at your own customers. The room tensed. Manny adjusted his hat brim. You've been stepping into my business. Numbers, bets, collections. Men who should come to me are lining up at your counter. That ends tonight. A collective gasp. One of Millie's nephews fingered the handle of a knife. Millie swatted his hand down without looking. Your business, she scoffed. You play at numbers. I invented numbers. If I wanted your territory, Manny, you'd already be selling cigars in Hamilton. The crowd oohed like school children at a playground fight. In the middle of it all, Shnooky panicked. He tried to wedge himself between Manny and Millie as a mediator, but the rising volume sent him ducking under nearest cafe table. From beneath the lace cloth, his voice piped up, muffled and terrified. Maybe we all just split the city, eh? You get uptown, she gets downtown, I'll take Scarborough. Nobody cares about Scarborough. The table rattled as someone kicked him. Shnooky yelped and went silent. Mick leaned toward Mac, subtle as ever. Guy's got the survival instincts of a cockroach in a shoe store, Mac muttered. The standoff stretched taut. Manny's lieutenants squared their shoulders. Millie's sons glared daggers. And through it all, Millie and Manny locked eyes, both too proud to blink first. Finally, Mick stepped forward, badge glinting just enough to remind the room why he and Mac were there. Before anyone starts redecorating this place in red, consider this. 2 men are dead, both after Millie predicted it. Maybe the killer's sitting right here, enjoying the show. That cooled the air, if only slightly. Manny's gaze flicked Millie, suspicion sharpening. Millie only crossed herself and muttered a prayer. Mac added, if somebody's playing games, they're playing both of you hard. And from where I stand, you're both next in line. That landed. Manny's face darkened. Millie's eyes narrowed. For the first time, the great rivals looked less like enemies and more like the reluctant comrades. 2 monarchs realizing their thrones might be sawed out from under them. Under the table, Shnooky squeaked. Does this mean we can all go home now? Nobody answered. Chapter 6, The Final Reading. The tea shop was candlelit and tense, more like a chapel before a funeral than a cafe. Millie Fortunato sat at the center table, silk shawl wrapped tight, eyes gleaming like coals in the dark. Her sons and nephews ringed the room, family wolves pretending to be sheep. Manny the Hat, lurked near the doorway, arms folded, hat brim low, watching with a predator's stillness. Mick Mack had taken up places along the wall, close enough to step in, far enough to let the family drama play out. Millie clapped her hands once, sharp as a pistol crack. You all come for fortunes, eh? For the leaves, the cards, the whispers? Fine. She lifted a teacup, drained it in one swallow, and turned it upside down in its saucer. Slowly, theatrically, she traced the patterns in the dregs with one jeweled finger. Her voice dropped to a whisper that carried to every corner. Tonight, before the stroke of midnight, I will die. The room sucked in a collective breath. Even Manny's men shifted uneasily. Mac muttered to Mick, "Well, that's one way to clear a room." But Millie didn't flinch. She set the cup down and folded her hands. Now we see who laughs. The lights flickered once, then twice, and then blackout. A scream tore through the darkness. Tables crashed, china shattered. Somewhere, a chair overturned. Mick lunged forward, heart pounding, Mac's curse close behind him. A match flared. Someone had struck it to light a candle. Its glow fell on Millie, slumped sideways in her chair, shawl half off her shoulders. A thin line of red glistened across her throat. Holy, Mac started. Hold it, Mick barked. He was already moving, snatching up the candlestick to scan the room. She's breathing, cut shallow. It was for show. Millie groaned, eyes fluttering open. Fools. My own blood. And then Mick saw him. One of the nephews, the thin, oily one who always laughed too loud, was backing toward the door, knife in hand, face pale as chalk. Police, Mick shouted, cracked like a whip. Drop it. The nephew bolted. Mac hurled himself across the room, catching the man by the waist and sending them both sprawling into a table of teapots. Porcelain exploded like fireworks. When the dust settled, Mac had the nephew pinned, his fedora knocked sideways, but his grin intact. You got a funny way of showing family loyalty, kid. The room erupted. Millie's sons cursing. Manny smirking. Shnooky crawling out from under yet another table. But Mick's voice cut through the noise. He wasn't proving Millie's fortune true. He was making it true. Rousseau, the stairwell victim, they weren't chance. He staged the deaths after she predicted them. And tonight he tried to do the same to her. Millie, now sitting upright with her shawl pulled tight again, fixed her nephew with a look that could curdle milk. My own sister's boy, she hissed. I take you in, I feed you, I dress you, and you repay me with knives in the dark? The nephew wilted, muttering about his turn, and the business being his. Millie spat on the floor. You'll have your turn, Bambino, in Kingston Pen. Mick cuffed the nephew and hauled him to his feet. Mac dusted off his coat and adjusted his hat. Manny tipped his own hat with a sly smile. Well, detectives, looks like Millie's throwing is safe. For now. Don't think a shack, Mick said. He said he's full of knives. And not all of them stay in the family. Epilogue. Leaves in the cup. By the time dawn crept across College Street, Millie Fortunato's tea shop was back in order. The broken teapot swept away, the blood scrubbed from the floorboards, candles replaced by the first rays of sun. Only the sharp smell of spilled brandy lingered, mingling with fresh bread from the ovens down the block. Millie herself sat at the head table, regal as ever, her shawl drawn tight and her rings flashing like a crown. The cut in her throat was bandaged, but her stare was undiminished, if anything, fiercer. Detective, she said, her voice low and heavy. You did your duty. For that, I thank you. But remember, don't mistake love for weakness. My family is my kingdom, and I defend it to the last breath. Mick gave a respectful nod. Mac, chewing on a biscotti, mumbled, Remind me never to play cards against you. The door creaked. In strolled Manny the Hat Kaufmann, carrying a bouquet of carnations as if it were a loaded revolver. He set them down with a little too much care. "For you, Millie," he said smoothly. "To show respect. Always had it for you." His eyes started toward the bandage on her throat. "Always will." Millie's laugh rolled like thunder. "Flowers, Manny? If you want to impress me, next time bring a cake. Or cash." Even Manny managed to chuckle, though his eyes betrayed the unease of a man who'd come within an inch of losing his rival. Not to his own hand, but to someone else's ambition. Mick and Mack exchanged glances, their work here technically finished. As they stepped out in the morning air, the detective's unease didn't fade. "Never drinking tea again," Mick muttered. "Next time," Mack said, brushing crumbs off his coat, "I'm sticking to coffee. Less chance of dying." They were halfway down the block when Mick reached into his pocket and drew out the folded note that Eve Whitmore had handed them. "Your deaths have already been written." Mick folded it and put it back into his coat pocket, his expression unreadable. Mack stuffed his hands in his overcoat and sighed. "Great. First fortunes, now prophecies. Think she's trying to scare us?" Mick looked back once at the tea shop, a Millie's silhouette framed in the window, shawl glowing red in the rising sun. "Not scare us," he said quietly. "Remind us. The game's bigger than fortune tellers and gamblers. And it's just getting started." This has been another episode of the Mick Mack Mysteries, only on Ontario Cold Cases, Canada's true crime podcast. Stay tuned for more tales of murder, mischief, and mystery, straight from the streets of post-war Toronto. Ontario Cold Cases, Canada's true crime podcast, available wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Subscribe to Ontario Cold Cases today so you never miss an episode. Please share your thoughts and questions in the comments.